Hey friends, I'm back with another video. This is going to be a follow-up to my complete beginner's guide on playing Everquest, from downloading it, installing it, and creating your first character. And maybe I'll get into a little bit of the gameplay as well for total beginners, total noobs. So if you're very familiar with the game, you can skip this video. I'm sorry. I think there might have a use for some folks out there that just either never played or it's been a really long time since they have played. So we're going to go to a race first that can be just about any class because it'll just be easier to go through them. I'll try to start at the top and work my way down. So first we have the Bard. The Bard is sort of a jack of all trades and a master of none. A Bard is like a warrior and an enchanter and a rogue all combined into one wacky little package. A Bard is like a musician that plays music that helps the group, and they can also dual wield weapons. They wear plate armor, but don't be fooled by the plate armor. They can't tank like a warrior can. They probably have the hit points of an enchanter, but they can wear plate, so it's a real weird balancing act that they do. And they can use swords, which is great. They can also charm monsters to fight for them, although I've never successfully charmed anything and had it fight for me for more than 2 seconds before charm broke as a Bard. Bards really shine in groups because they can haste the group, they can brain buff the group, which means you have a Bard in your group, and I think it's at level 10, 11, I can't remember for sure. I'm sure it's by level 20 they have at least one group haste song, which means everybody in the group attacks at an accelerated rate, so they have a faster attack speed, which means everybody in the group does extra damage. Bards also have a group heal over time, or a regeneration song, and I don't remember when they get it, but they also get a song that helps regenerate the group's mana pool, which is also very, very useful. Speeds up the whole dynamic of the group. And again, they can also fight. They have songs that can pacify monsters, so they can make really good pullers to single pull rather than getting a whole crowd of things. They can also mesmerize or put monsters to sleep, if that's a better reference for you. Putting a monster to sleep is good, like if you accidentally did get 2 to 3 different monsters, you put one of them to sleep while you kill off his friend, so that way they're not both hitting you at the same time, and then you kill the other one when he wakes up. So these are all great uses for a Bard, and again, I'm probably going to miss a bunch of stuff. I'm not 100% familiar with every class and what every class can and can't do. These are just some of the actions that I know I've done with a Bard. I mentioned that Bards are a little bit like rogues because they can pick locks. They are not the best at picking locks. Rogues are, of course, but they can do it. So all around, I would say a Bard is a great bet. You would probably get invited to a lot of groups as a Bard, and they're very helpful in raids too. So great on the high end. So I'm going to cover Beast Lord next. So I'm going to have to go to the Barbarian because Barbarians can be Beast Lords. And again, I'm not going to go over all the races like I already did in the previous video. I'm just going to click on what the Beast Lord is, and so you can get an idea of who can be one. Beast Lord is sort of like a monk, and you might say, well, I've never played before. What's a monk? A monk is like it's like a martial artist. It's like a karate guy, you know? They chop. They can do good hand-to-hand. They're great at punching and kicking things. Just think of any good old school karate movie that you might have seen, and that would probably more or less be a monk. You know, think like Shaolin monk. They're good at throwing things like ninja stars and stuff, and they, again, good at fighting. And the Beast Lord is similar, where they're great at hand-to-hand. They can also use blunt and piercing weapons, and they're good at kicking. But here's the difference on the Beast Lord. The Beast Lord also gets some spells. They get some magic. So they can cast some healing spells, and they get a little animal. At level 9, they could summon a little animal companion that helps them in battle, in fighting. So it's similar to some other classes like that have pets. The Beast Lord has, you know, their little animal pet that can help tank. So let's say you're fighting something, the monster is getting the better of you, you could send in your animal pet, and then you can back off, heal yourself, and jump back in and help your pet finish the kill. Beast Lords also can debuff monsters a little bit. They have a couple of slow spells which will slow the monster's attack, which is very, very beneficial. It's like they're only doing half the damage that they would do without being slowed. Beast Lords also get a couple of really cool buffs, one of them being like Spiritual Light or something like that, which gives everybody in your group a hit point and mana regeneration, which is really, really cool. Aside from that, I don't know that much more about Beast Lords. I mean, they do get access to the buff Spirit of the Wolf at around level 30, which is also a very sought after buff because it lets you run faster. It's a run speed buff, and they're a fun class to play. Next, we're going to talk Berserkers, and a Barbarian can also be a Berserker. A Berserker is a lot like a warrior or a fighter, if you're thinking Dungeons and Dragons type world. They only deal in two-handed weapons, though. I don't know why. Like, in my head, I would have thought a Berserker could wield, like, an axe in each hand, but the Berserkers of Everquest use a single two-handed weapon, be it an axe, or a large two-handed sword, or a large two-handed hammer, just anything that's two-handed. They can, I think, maybe even use two-handed piercing, but I'm not sure. But I know they can use two-handed, like, hammers and staves, and two-handed axes. They have a lot of cool utility without having magic. They don't really have any magic, but they do have some really interesting skills. There's one that's, I think, called Leg Slice, where you can kind of cripple your enemy, and it's similar to being snared, where your enemy can walk away but they can't run anymore, which means you're not going to have any problems killing them before they run from you. Like if they're about to die, a lot of monsters will start to run or try to flee, but if you've done the leg slice, they're moving very slowly, and you can usually kill them before the monster gets to their friends, and the friends jump in and help and kill you. They can also throw things. The Beast Lord can throw things, which they can manufacture axes that help them with these skills, and they throw axes, so they're good at ranged combat, and they're also good with just hand-to-hand, like not hand-to-hand, but melee range with their axe. They wear chainmail armor, so I wouldn't say that they are like a tank. You know, they're not intended to be up front taking all the punishment, but they can take more punishment than a magic user, than your normal caster type. So that's more or less what I know about a Berserker, which isn't a whole lot, but it could be more than what you know now. Then there's the Cleric, so let's go to a race that can be a Cleric, and that's over here. A Cleric is a priest class. They are basically what they sound like. They're priests, and they have the best and most powerful healing spells in the game. Clerics make the best healers, hands down. They also have the best, absolute best hit point buffs in the game. So they can really fortify the group with some good buffs, and they also keep everybody alive and healed. And if you die, you can always count on a Cleric to resurrect you or revive you. And you're going to ask, well, you know, we just respawn. What's the point of being revived or resurrected? Well, after level 6 in the game, you start losing a little bit of experience points every time you die, to the point where you could even start losing a level. So if you're level 30, for example, and you just turned level 30 and you're not that far into it, and then you die, you can end up being level 29 again. And if you die repeatedly without resurrections, you could find yourself losing that level too. So with having a priest, a cleric resurrect you, you get your experience points back. So it's a lot like being brought back to life where you fell. So it's always awesome and cool to have a cleric in your group to keep everybody alive and healthy. They can also cure different ailments, like cure poison and disease and blindness and other negative things that happen to you throughout the game. Clerics are particularly effective when fighting undead. They have a great line of spells that does a lot of damage against undead monsters like skeletons, ghouls, and vampires without a whole lot of mana cost. The downsides of a cleric would be that they're not very good fighters. They can wear plate armor and a shield and have a hammer or a mace, but they're just not great at wielding it. They do have other spells too that do a lot of damage. They like a what we like to call a nuke spell, which can blast the enemy with magic damage, which helps them survive fights. But they're not always. It's not a character you want to play if you want to solo. Clerics excel in group settings. And clerics, especially on a TLP server, a cleric is always going to be wanted in almost any group out there. Usually, if you see a full group and it doesn't have a cleric, it's just because they didn't find one at the time and they settled for a shaman or a druid. Which next brings me to the druid. The druid is another priest class. It's like a nature priest. Think of that weird hippie that you met at Burning Man who likes hugging trees and talked about nothing but saving the world in between hits of ecstasy. That's a druid. Honestly, that's probably not a druid. A druid is just a priest who's heavy into nature, and they will try to protect the forest and things like that as far as the roleplay aspect goes. But they are very, they have a lot of utility, especially on TLP servers before Plane of Knowledge comes out, or Planes of Power rather, because they can teleport. They can teleport all over Norath. They also get nice buffs like damage shields and Spirit of the Wolf, which is a very sought after run speed buff early in the game, because sometimes being able to outrun your enemy is the difference between life and death. They also have some hit point buffs, but those are not nearly as good or as powerful as the cleric ones. But again, they do have a damage shield, and if you are unsure what that means, a damage shield is a buff or a shield that's placed on a character, usually the tank or the warrior of the group, and anytime the monster hits your tank, your companion that you buffed with a damage shield, then that monster takes damage. So it's sort of like you're swinging your sword, but the thing you're hitting is either covered in fire or thorns, and every time you hit that thing, it hurts you in return. So it's almost like, all right, I'm out. It's it really helps. Druids also have some decent healing spells where they can act as a healer if a cleric isn't available. They also have regeneration spells, which can slowly regenerate hit points over time. And they have a snare, which is nice, especially in use in dungeons and stuff, because when a wounded monster starts trying to run away, if they're hit with a snare, they won't be able to run away. And if you've ever played a game like this before, monsters that flee in a dungeon end up getting all their friends along the way to come help them and attack you, which can end up really ugly really fast. I've been in some trains that were caused by a fleeing monster that had 20 to 30 different monsters coming at me and killed me rather quickly. It was very unpleasant. So a snare is a great thing to cast on your enemy. Druids also have a lot of very, very powerful damage over time spells, which are spells that cause damage over time. So it might do like 10 points of damage every 6 seconds or every 2 seconds or whatever the actual thing is. Please you don't need to correct me. I know that it's probably about every 2 or 3 seconds or something. I'm just saying as an example. It's just different spells have different amounts of damage that they do. But they also have some debuffs, which can be very useful in a group. So that's the Druid. Again, they can teleport to different locations, so that's like fast travel, and it can really help cut down on your time, because running across the country can really suck sometimes. A Druid can help you there. An Enchanter is very interesting. It should really be considered an evil character, but it's not, because an Enchanter can completely remove free will. An Enchanter can enslave any monster to their will with a charm spell, and it's just really interesting that they're not considered evil, because how is enslaving those you come across not evil? That's what enchanters do. Enchanters are great at debuffing monsters. They have magic resistance debuffs, which are excellent and can't be resisted. And then they have attack speed debuffs, which will slow the attack speed of whatever monster you're fighting. They can put multiple monsters to sleep. If the group has pulled 5 monsters to fight, well, the Enchanter can put 4 of those 5 to sleep and let everybody in the group concentrate on killing 1 monster at a time, which makes life a lot easier for everybody, especially the healer. Enchanters can also root a monster in its place, and when an Enchanter does charm a monster, the monster fights for the Enchanter. So the Enchanter ends up being one of the higher DPS players in the game. Now, there's a serious downside to charming a monster. Sure, nothing deals damage like a charmed monster as far as pets go, but when that charm breaks, that monster is coming for you big time. So a lot of Enchanters can end up dying if they can't get the formerly charmed monster under control before it retaliates for having its free will stolen and being enslaved. Enchanters also have really good intelligence and mana regeneration buffs, like Breeze, Clarity, and KEI, and different ones that go way beyond level 100. And they're very sought after for that reason, because brain buffs and mana regeneration is really, really nice to have. They also have the best haste in the game, which haste is a attack speed buff. Lets you attack faster. I'd say the only one that can compare with an Enchanter as far as attack speed buffs would be a Bard, because they have similar buffs that they can sing to keep the group buffed. Enchanters also can enchant metals, which makes they can use the metals to make jewelry or armor, and some of the jewelry these days is amazing. So if you like crafting skills and you want to learn to become a jeweler, you want to make an Enchanter. Enchanters also get a little pet that they can summon, but they don't really have control of that little pet. Now, this little pet is very useful in the beginning of the game, before they can even get the charm spell to enslave monsters to do their bidding. And basically the pet is a sword and shield that follows the Enchanter everywhere, and it will attack anything that starts attacking the Enchanter. But you can't tell that pet to back off or follow me or guard here like other pets do. So Enchanter pets will not obey commands. Charmed monsters will, but the animation, the sword and shield ones, do not obey commands until like level, I want to say 65 or so, where the Enchanter has some AA abilities that lets them control that little animated sword and shield pet. The best Enchanter's offense is probably using a charmed pet, but they also do have some very good debuffs and damage over time spells. And to explain again, damage over time is a spell that does damage over time. So every couple of seconds, a spell may do 10 points of damage or 20 points of damage, depending on your level and the spell, because of course higher level spells will do more damage over time. Enchanters also get a couple of direct damage spells which have a partial stun to them. That's also pretty good and handy when fighting other casters. Enchanters get some pretty good area effect stuns. An area effect spell means a spell that affects the area around the caster. So let's say I have 3 orcs right around me, all standing pretty close, and I cast this one of my color spells, like dancing colors, dancing lights, something like that. I forget the names of every spell, and it will stun all 3 of those guys for a few seconds, in which case the enchanter would then try to maybe put one of them to sleep, or cast slow on one of them, or even fear one of them to make them run away. Just any of those usually helps out. But most people don't like using fear in a dungeon. It's a really bad idea. Fear is something that you would only use outdoors. At least I would never use fear in a dungeon. It's kind of like, do you want to die? Okay, then use fear. If you don't want to die, then use sleep or mesmerize instead. Because fear is just going to make that monster run, and a monster runs in a dungeon, all the other monsters are going to be like, hey, what's wrong with him? And they're going to go and find you and kill you. So it's always a bad idea. So that more or less is an enchanter. I know I'm probably missing a ton of stuff, and you're all going, oh my god, what about this and this and this? I'm sorry. I'm just trying to make this as a basic thing covering all the different classes. Now we have magicians. Magicians are my favorite class. Magicians are also intelligence casters, similar to the enchanter, that have the best pets in the game, hands down. This is my opinion, so if you disagree, that's fine. But in my opinion, the mage pets are the best in game. I don't see how any other pet can really compete aside from an enchanter charming a monster. Yes, an enchanter versus a mage might be a very heavy challenge for a mage to survive, because those charmed mobs always hit harder than any pet, just hands down. A mage has a lot of utility. They can summon food and water and even weapons and armor for the group. They're great at summoning throwing weapons, because throwing weapons, you throw them all and you're done, you're empty, you don't have any more. Well, if there's a mage in your group, let's say you're a guy that uses a bow and arrow and you're out of arrows, he could summon you arrows. He might, if you're a beast lord and you ran out of throwing stars, he could summon some throwing stars for you. It's just very useful to have. And the pets are really strong and powerful. I play a lot with a mage, and I used to solo a lot with a mage, where my pet was basically like my warrior. It was like my tank. And the mage has healing spells that only work on healing their own pet. So of course they can't be a healer like a priest in a group and heal the other players, but they can heal their own pet. Or some mages will just let their pet die and have another pet ready to summon as soon as that one dies and send in the new pet. Some will say that that is more mana efficient, but I don't consider it particularly safer, because if that new pet cannot get the monster to attack them instead of you, it's going to go straight for you and you're dead. So just saying, I'd rather keep the pet alive, because the pet's been building up all that hate, aggression from that monster. So mages are a lot like a wizard with a pet. They can cast punishing nukes or direct damage spells, as we all like to call them, and they do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. Mages mostly use fire and magic. Magic in the sense of enchanted mystical blade attacks and like shock of blades and spells like that, and fireballs. And again, I can't stress enough that they have their pets. They have options of an earth pet. Earth pet, the benefit of that is it casts root. A mage doesn't have the ability to cast the root spell, but their earth pet does. And root is great when you're in a dungeon and you keep the monster you're fighting rooted to the spot so they can't run away and call their friends. Then you have the air pet. The air pet is also really good and terrific against casters like other mages, wizards, enchanters, because the air pet can stun. And even though it's a brief stun, any stun can help interrupt spell casting, which means that maybe they're not going to be able to throw fireballs at you and kill you before you kill them. Like the Enchanter mages only use cloth armor, which I probably should bring up, and they are not particularly strong. They can die fairly easy if their pet dies. So you rely a lot on your pets. You always want to make sure your pet is in good standing. He's healthy. He's got his hit points. You know, you can also summon equipment like swords and armor to give to your pet to make your pet stronger. Mages also get a water pet, which the water pet is also very good. It's got one of the higher damages of all the pets. It can backstab like a rogue, which is nice. And then there's the fire pet. The fire pet is a lot like a wizard. It mostly just hurls direct damage spells at whatever you're fighting. The fire pet being the absolute weakest as far as like health goes, and then the water pet is like the second weakest. The two strongest pets as far as having them tank for you and take all the enemy's aggression would be the air pet or the earth pet. Those two make great tanks. Next here is the monk. The monk, which I mentioned when I was talking about the beast lord, is like Shaolin monk. Think martial artist, karate person. They are great at punching. They're great at kicking. They have a bunch of nice special attacks that do a lot of damage. They don't need a lot of heavy armor. Sometimes having almost no equipment and no armor is the best thing for a monk. Monks have an innate armor class that makes them harder to hit as long as they're not carrying more than 15 stone. Now, if you go over that weight limit, then the armor class might take a little dip. I don't think this is as important in later levels, but in the beginning, from like level 1 to 50, I guess, that extra armor class might be useful. Monks can use like cured silk armor or leather armor. And there's also monk-specific armor out there. They're not going to wear chainmail or plate, so they can take a hit because they're definitely in that fighter class range. They do melee damage. They're considered melee DPS, and they do a lot of damage. They're probably close, or if not equal, to a rogue as far as the kind of damage that they could deal on an opponent. Monks have a couple of interesting utilities. I believe they can sneak. I know that they can feign death, which feign death makes the monster you were fighting think that you're dead. So if you ever find yourself in over your head and you feign death successfully, the monsters be like, oh, we killed her, or we killed him, and they'll forget about you eventually and just walk away, and there you go, you're safe now. Monks also can heal themselves, which are one of the few classes out there that can do this. Not through magic, they don't have any magic at all, but just through the willpower or whatever the hell it is, some crazy Jedi type stuff, they can self-heal. A monk is pretty good to play if you're new to the game, you have no money and no equipment. Because why? You don't really need money and equipment to play a monk and have them actually be good and effective. Monks can also solo pretty good too. Are monks good in groups? Absolutely. They're great for pullers and they're great for DPS. Again, DPS is just shorthand for damage per second. The term puller means you're the guy that the group asks to go and grab a monster from another group of, maybe a larger group of monsters, and to pull it towards the group to kill. That's often a thing that some groups do. They'll have one person go and find a monster to kill, bring it back to the rest of the group, because maybe you have a cleric in the group and the cleric might like to sit down in one place so they can keep regenerating their mana, and mana is the magic energy that they need to keep the group alive. Next we have a necromancer. A necromancer is another intelligence-based magic user, and they are considered evil, whereas enchanters are not. Go figure. Because a necromancer only enslaves the dead. Yes, necromancer can raise skeletons up from the dead to fight for them, but they're already dead. They didn't have any free will anymore to begin with. So really, necromancers should be considered good, or at least neutral, not evil. At least that's my opinion. But there are necromancers out there that are very naughty and like to cause trouble. Necromancer spells are mostly damage over time spells, like they could do a disease-based damage over time, a poison-based damage over time, and a magic-based damage over time spell. They also get fire damage over time spells. So a lot of slow acting spells, but they're very effective, and they're also very mana efficient. One of my favorite things about a necromancer is that they get a snare dot spell like Engulfing Darkness or Dooming Darkness, where it's going to ensnare your victim, meaning they can't run away, at least not very quickly, and it's going to damage them over time. So that's usually the spell I use to start when I'm playing a necromancer, just to ensnare the thing, and then I send in the skeleton pet. The skeleton pet is similar to a mage pet in the sense that it's a little servant that will fight for you. But unlike an enchanter's enslaved monster, this skeleton will never attack you. It is your buddy, it is your best friend until it dies, until it is slain by whatever monster you're fighting. That skeleton loves you because you didn't take away its free will. You actually gave it a second chance at life. Necromancers are really good. Paladins are like holy warriors. They are a little bit like a priest, but they're like a fanatical priest that wants to go to some other country and convert everybody to their beliefs. Yes, that's a paladin. They're kind of dicks. A paladin is like a holy warrior who really believes in their deity, their god, and they fight fervently for that deity. They're usually considered lawful good in alignment as far as games like Dungeons and Dragons goes. So you really don't want to be doing horrible, evil things as a paladin, although I've actually had a paladin do horrible, evil deeds just for the fun of it because I wanted to see what would happen. Paladins are good fighters. They can wear plate armor. They can use one-handed swords or two-handed swords, or even one-handed blunt weapons like hammers, or two-handed blunt weapons like long maces or whatever. And they can also use a bow and arrow. They're just not very good at it. And they have great healing spells, almost as good as a cleric, but not quite. So I wouldn't ever suggest having a paladin as your only healer, but if that's all you have, then they will do until a proper priest comes along. I would say a druid or a shaman would make a better healer than a paladin, but that's my own opinion. I would usually want to have the paladin doing damage. If they use a two-handed sword, they can actually be pretty good at DPS. If they want to use their one-handed sword and shield, they make good tanks. They're pretty good at holding aggro because they have stun spells that can also help interrupt casting of spells. So if you're fighting a magic user that's trying to cast spells on you and you are a paladin, just stun them a few times so they can't cast spells against you. That's also good when you're fighting a healer. If you're fighting a priest that keeps healing itself, well, if you could stun it enough and keep it stunned, then it can't heal itself and you can kill it that much faster. So that's about the use of a paladin. A paladin also gets a few pacify type spells, which can make a paladin useful as a puller to single pull. Because if a paladin comes along 3 or 4 monsters and they pacify 3 out of the 4 and then they just attack the one, if they're lucky they'll get to pull that single thing for the group to kill without getting overwhelmed by all 4 coming at you at once. Paladins also have a few unique skills like lay on hands, which is something they can use like once a day, at least once a day in game, which might be like every 2-3 hours or something like that. Lay on hands is almost a full heal of yourself, but you could also use that full heal on someone else in your group who's about to die. So think of a paladin as a very holier-than-thou knight. If you're role-playing a paladin, you might actually act kind of snobby, especially towards other other people, like if somebody's a rogue or they might not think much of a monk, you know, that sort of thing. But most people don't really role play that way. It'd be kind of a douchey thing to do. Like, oh, I'm not going to group with the rogue. Rogues are scum. If you wanted to, you could do that, but you're not going to make any friends. Now we have a ranger. A ranger is an interesting character. Rangers can track, which I should also mention, so can druids. That's something I missed when I was talking about druids. Rangers and druids can track. The tracking ability is very useful. I made a video about tracking, so you can always do a search for it if you're curious. But the short of it is, tracking is just what it sounds. It's like being able to find monsters or even other players in whatever zone you're in. So if you're out in the wilderness in a forest or something and you want to try to find a lion or a bear, well, you can use the tracking ability to find that lion or bear. You'll also be able to tell if that lion or bear will kick your butt or if it's likely that you'll be able to kick its butt, because there are color-coded ratings to tell you how powerful a monster is. Rangers are great fighters, or they're similar to like a warrior, but they can only wear chainmail armor, so they can't wear plate. But they can do some light tanking. I've had been in many groups where the ranger was the tank. They can taunt, I think. They also have a snare spell, which is very handy because it sort of helps keep control of the monster you're fighting where they can't run away quickly. Rangers have a couple of damage over time spells they can cast. They can also dual wield, so have a weapon in each hand or use a two-hander if they want to. The tracking ability makes them very useful for trying to find rare named monsters that drop special magic items that you may want that are usually of high value. Rangers can also be self-sufficient by foraging their own food. Forage could be a very useful ability because some of the foraged items that are not food can be used in trade skills, and they may sell for a lot of money in game. So it's always nice to save all your foraged items, even if it doesn't look like it's worth much. Something like a tuft of dire wolf fur might sell in the bazaar for hundreds of platinum. Rangers are best when using a bow and arrow. If you think Legolas from Lord of the Rings, that would be the perfect ranger right there. Rangers do crazy damage at high levels if they just go full bow and arrow and hail arrows at something from a distance. They excel at that, and that's usually what I try to use them with, shooting arrows from a distance at level 70 plus. Before that, you can melee and do close combat if you like. Rangers also get a few healing spells and a couple of damage shields and hit point buffs that may be very helpful to the group. Rangers also get the Spirit of the Wolf run speed buff, which you get it at about level 30, is a very sought after buff because sometimes being able to outrun your enemy is a lifesaver. Rogues are like thieves or bandits. They are very sneaky. They can sneak and hide, making themselves completely invisible, but without the use of magic. Thieves can actually steal items from their enemies. So during a fight, sometimes if you're fighting within a group that has a rogue, you might find the guy that you're fighting, if it's an orc or another humanoid type monster, says, "Hey, stop thief," because the rogue picked their pockets, which they often do. Rogues can be very helpful though, because they can also pick locks. They can get you through dungeons without setting off traps, because they also have the ability to disarm traps. If you find a chest in a dungeon that happens to be locked, well, the rogue might be able to pick the lock on the chest and open the chest. If the chest is trapped, the rogue can also disable the trap in that chest before it picks the lock to open it, making it safe to open without any crazy bombs or poison hexes going off that poison the entire group and kill everybody. Rogues have a lot of utility. They can also craft poisons, not only for themselves, but poisons that they can give and sell to other players. They can share it with their friends in their group, and those poisons do a lot of damage. Rogue can even craft poisons that will slow an enemy's attack speed or snare them, slowing their run speed. I really enjoy playing a rogue, and they have a lot of utility, and they're great in groups, and they have very high damage potential. Shadow Knights. Shadow Knights, from what I've heard from other players, can make the best tanks because they can snare monsters, they can dot monsters with several damage over time spells that really builds up all that hate and aggro. So the monster gets so angry and hateful towards the Shadow Knight that it doesn't go after the other people in the group that are also hitting it with spells or swords or whatever. Shadow Knights are sort of the anti-version of the Paladin. In Dungeons and Dragons, they would be considered an anti-Paladin. A Shadow Knight can use a one-handed weapon with a shield, or a two-handed sword, or axe, or blunt weapon. Shadow Knights use plate armor and are considered to be evil. Why? I don't know, because their spells and magic deals with disease and hate, and they can also, similar to a necromancer, enslave the dead by summoning a little skeleton minion to help them do their bidding. At least they're not enslaving the living like an enchanter. Shadow Knights are great in groups, and again, very good tanks. They can also be a lot of fun to play. Shadow Knights can also heal themselves a little bit with a series of life tap spells. It's sort of like a vampire siphoning your life force and using it to sustain themselves. The Shadow Knight can also pose as a puller for the group because they too can use a feign death type spell that will make enemies forget about them if they accidentally pull off more they can handle. Next we have a Shaman. A Shaman is a very useful character to have. They are always welcome in groups, at least the groups that I've been in. Shaman have the largest selection of buffs or beneficial spells in the entire game. Nobody has more buffs than a Shaman. Shaman can heal you, regenerate you, and make you fight faster and more efficient. At higher levels, they even get buffs that will make you do additional damage if you're just a warrior or a melee type. By sort of enchanting your weapon with some proccing buff that can cause a lot of extra damage. Shaman at level 9 get the Spirit of the Wolf buff, which they are the youngest class to get that buff at level 9. No one else gets it at that level. I think Druids have to be level 10 or 11 to get that buff. Shaman are the only class in the game who can do the alchemy skill. Alchemy is a very useful skill of crafting potions. You can craft everything from healing potions to Spirit of the Wolf potions, which can be sold to other players. So if a Shaman isn't available at that time and a player needs a run speed buff, they just drink a potion. Glug, glug, glug. Now I run fast. Shaman can even craft clarity potions, which is a brain buff to help you regenerate your mana faster. They can craft spirituality potions, which regenerates both mana and health. Shaman can even craft damage shield potions, which, if you remember, damage shield causes damage on anybody that hits you. So if you drink a damage shield potion made by a Shaman called Skin Spikes, then anything that hits you takes damage, which makes it so much easier to kill them. So Shaman can be a lot of fun to play. They also, at level 30, it's either 30 or 32, they get their own pet. It's like a spirit wolf that helps you fight. It's not the best, strongest, or most efficient pet, but it will definitely help you get the job done and might save your life in a pinch. You can always sacrifice that poor spirit wolf by sending it into battle while you run for cover. Shaman probably have the best slow in the game, which is a spell that will slow the enemy's attack speed. I think the only one to second the Shaman on slow buffs is the Enchanter. Shaman can also haste people in the group, but Shaman's haste is second to the Enchanter. Enchanter has the best haste in the game, maybe right there next to the Bard. So in short, Shaman are great utility players. They are excellent in groups. They can debuff enemies buff the group and heal everybody in the group and keep them healthy. Now we have the warrior. The warrior is probably the most basic bitch type of character in the game. A warrior can wear plate armor, basically just about any type of armor that they feel like, and use almost any weapon. They are proficient at even ranged attacks, like they can use a bow and arrow, they can throw javelins and spears, they can use two-handed weapons, slashing weapons, piercing weapons, blunt weapons, and everything in between. Warriors do not have use of any kind of magic at all, but they do have a good number of combat skills that they can call on to help them survive a fight. The warrior is a lot like a Dungeons and Dragons fighter, just basic, all attack, all armor, and they do really count on equipment. If you can't afford decent equipment or can't find decent equipment, or you're not interested in maybe crafting equipment, then the warrior might not be for you, because they count on having decent armor and weapons to be effective in the game. Can you make a warrior at level 1 with no money and no equipment? Sure, you can always find equipment along the way. That's what a lot of us did when this game started. You might even run into some nice gnome out there on the Throne of Ice server willing to give you a nice sword to help you get started. In a nutshell, that is the warrior. Weapons, armor, grrr. They're also pretty good at holding aggro by using the taunt ability and some other abilities like bellow and other ones that I can't remember the name of right now. Last, we have the wizard. The wizard is your classic wizard of story time. They have magic, very powerful magic. They allegedly have the most powerful and strongest direct damage spells in the game, hands down. They're also great for transportation. It's not that you'll find a wizard driving around in an Uber ready to pick you up, but they can teleport you places. Wizards have a vast inventory of teleportation spells and translocation spells, where they can whisk you off to just about anywhere in Norath or any of the other many continents. They can even transport their fellow players to the different planes, like Plane of Hate and the Plane of Cheese Whiz. I don't know, I can't remember all the names of the planes. But wizards can also snare their enemies, which makes it difficult for their enemies to run away. They can do area attack spells, which is sort of an area blast of direct damage. And they control spells like fireballs and ice comets and electricity and magic. The only downside I would say really to a wizard is they do tend to run out of mana fairly quickly, especially on a TLP server. They have to sit down and meditate a lot to get their mana up to be effective in a fight. The other downside is that while they can snare and root a monster to keep the monster away from them, wizards don't have any kind of pets. At least no pets that will ever help them in a fight. The only pets that wizards get are little imp type things that will help them regenerate their mana more quickly and reduce the fizzles of spells. At a higher level, a wizard can summon a sword to help them fight, but the sword is more just like a damage over time spell, and that sword only has about 100 hit points of life in it. It just takes one good whack from a monster against that sword the wizard summoned before that sword dies. So really, that sword is only going to be useful when the wizard is in a group and there's a tank getting all the attention from the monster. So do I like wizards? Are wizards my favorite? Absolutely not. I'd say they're my least favorite class to play in the game because of the whole thing of not having a pet. But if you're playing on Throne of Ice server, you might actually enjoy a wizard, because Throne of Ice server has everything unlocked and you can always have a warrior mercenary help you, and the warrior mercenary will basically behave just like having a pet. It will attack things for you, it will hold aggro while you could stand in the background and launch fireballs or ice comets at it. I would say having mercenaries made the wizard a lot more viable as far as a class that you might want to play solo, because I would be terrified to solo as a wizard without having a mercenary available to keep monsters off my back. But again, I'm not trying to throw shade at wizards. They have, like I said, a vast inventory of teleportation spells, probably even more than the Druid. And they do have the most damaging direct damage spells in the game. I'm just not a big fan of them myself. Anyway, this should cover all the different classes. I hope I was able to shed some light on how some of them work. I tried to keep my opinion out of it, except for with the wizard. I just can't help it. I'm really sorry. No matter what class you end up choosing, you'll probably enjoy it, at least for a while. If you get bored, you can always make up another character of a different class until you find the one that suits you best. I hope you found this video informative. If you liked what I do and you want to help support me and support the channel, consider leaving a like on the video or sharing it with a friend. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already subscribed. You can also join the channel as a channel member. Channel members get special perks and privileges like access to member-only videos and content. They also can get access to our private Discord server, where it's like a hangout that we have a lot of fun at. We often share different ideas and links to music videos that we share for fun. There's also a bit of a knowledge base that we're building with links to very helpful quests and tasks that you can do inside Everquest. If you look in the description below, you'll also find links to all my other social media accounts where you're welcome to follow me. I'd like to give a shout out to our good friend MMO Hippie. MMO Hippie has been a valued member of our humble community here at Fezzelwig's Forum, and he's gone with us on several quests now, and he has become the brains of the operation. I really appreciate all his help. And he has his own channel, so go check it out. Look for MMO Hippie on YouTube, and I'll put the URL right up on the screen so you can see it. Thanks for being a good friend to the channel, and we really appreciate you. Have a great day and a wonderful tomorrow.